welcome to the Williamsville Public Library and Museum. Today is Wednesday, August 30th, 2023, and we're talking to sisters Lois Robison Thompson and Carol Robison Harris about local business and history. So welcome, ladies. Appreciate you joining us with some friends here. Tell us a little bit about your family. So you had the same parents. Could you tell us where you were born, your parents' names, what they did?
I was born in Barkley, Illinois. Lived there a month, and then moved to Williamsville, and that's where I've lived the rest of my life.
Okay, and how about you, Lois?
Always in Williamsville.
Okay.
Lived in Williamsville all my life.
And what were your parents' names and what did they do?
Dwayne and Etta Mae. And Mom was a homemaker. Dad worked at the Shell service station. He was always a mechanic.
All right, and did you have other siblings?
Yes.
And how many siblings did you have?
2 brothers.
Okay, older or younger?
Younger.
So where did you live in Williamsville?
I lived on 101 West Jones. That's where we both grew up, 101 West Jones, which that house is no longer there.
Do you remember like the kids that you played with at school and after school, or some of them still in the area?
Yeah, we had next door to us, we had neighbors, the Fays, Fred Pike. He lived next door to us. And we had Grace Rock. She lived down the block from us. She'd come to eat her meals with us sometimes.
And she claimed us as her family.
Yeah, Quentin Batorf was my brother's friend. He was involved in the Scouts. And when you have 2 brothers, you have lots of kids, coming in from the neighborhood. But mainly it was just in that block area, even though we ran the town.
So what kind of things did you guys do for fun when you were running Williamsville at that time?
Running.
Right. Well, we rode our bikes. We used to ride around the country block. We played house on the front porch.
Got in trouble for that.
We got in trouble for that.
Why is that?
Because we took all the clothes and hung them up all along the porch rail while Grandma was babysitting. And we asked us if it was okay for us to do that. And we said, oh, sure, Mom won't mind. And Mom found out we did that and we got in trouble.
So you're taking clean clothes, I assume?
Yeah, clothes from the closet.
Of course,
yeah.
Of course. Much more fun that way.
Yeah, we got into the crackers for the food we cooked. And
sure.
Yeah, we did restaurant. We played restaurant. We played school. I think the day school was out, we were playing school,
Sure.
even though we didn't like school.
Okay. So what are some of your fondest memories of growing up in Williamsville?
the best thing I liked to do, obviously, was to collect any change I could find. We got a quarter every week for our allowance. We thought we were rich, And you go up to the drugstore and you buy penny candy. So if you were lucky, there was 3 for a penny. You could get a whole bag of candy.
Yeah, we were quite good shoppers at Logan's drugstore.
Yeah, Logan's drugstore. Yeah.
So is that something that your parents instilled in you, to be smart with your money?
I wouldn't say that if it was up to that.
What do you think your parents did teach you? What kind of values do you think they really taught you by example? Or?
Well, I know my dad always taught us respect. We lived on the corner, and people would walk by. They didn't get in the car and go places like they do now. I mean, our neighbors and stuff, you always called them by their last name, Mrs. Fay or Mr. Wilcoxon, or where you showed respect. That was one thing he taught us, and to be friendly.
When you grew up, you both chose to stay in Williamsville. Where did you live and work here in Williamsville? If we want to start with Lois.
Mostly for the first part, after I got married, I had that shop in the basement and worked there quite a bit. Lots of hours in that shop.
What shop was that?
My beauty shop.
Okay.
Lois's beauty shop. Had planned to really, just continue with that until my daughter was born with a seizure disorder, and that kind of put a damper on that. So I started taking other people's children, starting with Tammy Corral. So I had a little daycare that started a bigger daycare. Started out little and it got big.
So how many kids did you end up taking care of? When you say it grew?
The maximum you could only take 8, but
Okay.
yeah, that was wild having home daycare.
So how many kids did you have yourself?
I had Martha and Carolyn at that time. Later, I had another child, but this was while I lived on 101 West Jones.
So how many kids did you have altogether then?
3.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Did your kids all went to school here in Williamsville then?
Yes.
Correct. And did they stay in the area when they grew up?
For a while, but then Martha is in a group home now in Springfield and has been for quite a few years, over 20 years. And my daughter Carolyn lives in Springfield now. She lived in Elkhart for a while, and Andrew lives in St. Louis, Missouri.
Okay, so do you get to see them often?
Yeah, pretty often.
Nice. And what about you, Carol? How about as you grew up and you decided to stay in Williamsville, where did you live and work?
Well, I lived in 3 different places. We started out, I got married in '67. We started out on a house on Harpole Street, and then we moved to what used to be called the Saffers House. That was also on Harpole Street, which is one side of the track and the other side, and lived there for a couple of years, and then we moved to the house on Elm Street.
Okay.
When we discovered we were not getting any younger, we didn't need steps.
All right, and did you have kids?
Yes,
And
2
how many?
daughters.
Okay, 2 daughters. And did they stay in the area after going to school in
Yes.
Williamsville?
Yeah, my daughter, my oldest daughter, worked at Franklin Life, which then they combined, and now she works at home, working for the same company that came from there. And Cindy, she works in Springfield. She also works at home. They both live in Williamsville.
So you get to see them often, so that must be nice having family nearby.
Very often. Sometimes too often.
So you're obviously busy raising your families, taking care of each other. In addition to all of that, were you involved in any community organizations?
Yeah, well, we belong to the Christian church.
Mm-hmm. And did you do things through the church?
Yeah.
What kinds of things?
We started out in the Methodist church.
Yeah, we started.
Oh, okay.
I was married in the Methodist church.
Okay.
Because that was right down the block from us.
Okay.
In
Where we
those
grew up.
days, you just
Went to
walked.
the closest church.
Yeah, closest church.
Nice. Okay. Okay.
I served on committees and on the board at the Methodist church. And then when we moved, we started going to the Christian church because that's where my husband had gone. And that's where we've been ever since.
About the same for you, Lois, or were there any other organizations that you were active in?
Well, I really didn't serve on any boards, but I did teach Sunday school.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so that was more my avenue.
How many years did you do that roughly? Do you remember?
Oh, off and on, maybe for 10 years.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Was that when your kids were younger or after
Yeah,
they were older?
when they were younger.
Okay. So, part of living in Williamsville, growing up in Williamsville, is all the community celebrations that we have. The Community Foundation's very active, and some of the churches and other organizations. Are there any specific ones that stick out in your minds? Any ones that you remember in particular? It's like Autumn on the Boulevard or the 53 Centennial or anything like that.
Well, I know we were
really young during the centennial. I think I might have been.
well, our mom made us dresses.
Yeah, I
for the
remember those
centennial.
dresses, those long dresses.
So what were the dresses about?
For
They
the
were-
centennial, all the men grew beards, and
Wore white
the women
dress
made
shirts
those.
and
Yeah, a lot of the women in town made the long dress, the period dresses, and yeah, it was a community thing. Everybody really got excited about that.
So you were trying to recreate kind of an 1853
Yes,
feel?
yes, that's
Yes.
what we were
Okay.
doing.
it was Little House on the Prairie all over again.
It was.
So what else did they do to try to kind of take you back to that time, aside from the long beards and white shirts for the guys and the long dresses for the women?
I was too young to really remember. I just remember being excited about the dresses and the beards.
On a bigger scale, were there things that you remember over the course of the years on a more national scale that really felt like they affected your life, your everyday life in Williamsville, in terms of wars or conflicts or anything else on a national or international scale that you felt really affected your day-to-day life in Williamsville?
Well, I was thinking about that this morning, you know, as the news was on.
Mm-hmm.
Back in the day when we were kids, you didn't have access to, you know, news. I mean, it was the 6 o'clock news at night, and, you know, my dad would watch that. But when you get 3 channels, there was no use sitting there, and there was no electronic things or nothing like that. What you did hear about, you know, what I can remember was, one was the Bay of Pigs that realized that my safe little place where I lived could be potentially not so safe. And then when we went to school, Vietnam, a lot of the guys,
Yeah, the kids,
you know,
they were old enough to serve.
And a lot of them went, you know, to that war.
So guys that you were in high school with got sent to Vietnam.
Right.
Okay. People in your class that you'd gone to school with.
Yes.
Well, I think the media is one thing that we just didn't. You had newspapers, which I can remember my dad every morning reading the newspaper and commenting about the election that was coming up and who was running, and he was a very devout, very devout Republican.
So do you think that your parents kind of tried to shelter you from the things going on that were not so great on the national scale to kind of make your life here in Williamsville feel safer, or did they want you to see the bigger picture and the outside view of things?
Well, my dad told me one time, he said, you know, your opinion counts. It was an election where, of course, back in those days, they didn't have the commercials. Candidates were respected for their views, and they really didn't drag anyone else that was running against them. So you had a pretty good, I remember my dad watching TV for those that were candidates, you know, and he always said, you know, you can't complain if you don't go out and vote.
Right.
So
that's another lesson that that your parents had left you with then.
he says that's why we live in this country, you know.
You know, Dad always, being a businessman, he always got dressed up, which in those days they dressed up a lot more than they do today.
Dress shirt,
And
dress
he
pants.
looked so sharp when he would be, because being a mechanic, we usually saw him in grease and oil and old work clothes and stuff, but he would dress up and go to all the funerals. He was always on the trustees. He'd go be involved with the village to make sure he was putting in his time and being interested in what was going on in the town. He was always involved in what was going on in the town. And also the church, he spent some time as on the board at the church. So he stayed involved in any community things.
He was on the village board too.
Yeah, he was.
And what about your mom?
And she was basically a homemaker. She always wanted to be a nurse, and she did do that later.
Oh, really?
Yeah, when they moved to Missouri, she was number 1 in her class.
Yeah.
Did she go back? When did she go back to school then?
In maybe early 70s. Yeah.
Okay. And how long was she a nurse?
She was a nurse for 20 plus, maybe 21, 22, because she kind of semi-retired and then went back to it. So,
Well, they moved back here,
yeah.
Okay.
and she started
Worked at
working at
St.
St.
John's,
John's.
yeah.
Okay.
Started out in Missouri. They moved from here in 1969 to go to Missouri, and she went to school while they were in Missouri
Okay.
and worked at the emergency room in West Plains, Missouri.
Mhm.
And then they moved back here when they retired? Is that correct?
Yeah, I
So you were lucky to have them back here as they got older
Yes.
so that you could help them out and so forth.
Right.
Did you have grandparents in the area when you were growing up?
yes,
Yes.
Okay, so your kids got to have their grandparents around as well as they were growing up?
yes.
Yes.
And who were your grandparents?
My grandfather, my dad's dad, passed away 2 weeks before I was born, so I never did get to know him. My grandma, Grace Robison, she lived in town up on the boulevard, little house that was up there.
It was a cute little house,
Cute
but they've
little house.
added a story to it since
And then our maternal grandparents, they lived outside of Sherman on Holton Farm.
And what were their names?
Thomas and Lena DeWitt, and she was a nursing assistant at St. John's, and he worked at the mill in Sherman. And their son, they had daughters, but their son was born a month after I was born. So he was frequently at our house.
Yeah, like another brother.
Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to share your memories with us, ladies, and thank you for joining us today.
You're welcome. Thank you.